Archive for Mathematical Logic. Can't do logic on stream because you sit around reading formulas all day, and that's no good. AI in Society, this is where we were last week. Let's not do that again. AJP, can look there, but their papers are too long for me. Oh, look at this. Some of these are saying they're not so bad. You co-authored a couple of health disparity papers on asthma. Very interesting, Tropical Geek. Yeah, I mean, asthma around here in New York, the South Bronx has one of the worst asthma rates in the entire country. And it's got to be environmental because it's not a very clean area. I mean, that's basically where a lot of old ships used to dump their stuff. So you've probably got a ton of old chemicals in the area. So, yeah, I mean, but I don't know enough about that. You could tell us. I mean, that'd be pretty interesting. All right, so we got looks like 2 papers right here because I got my little highlighter. So you can see little highlights. Bad Apples and Broken Ladders, a pragmatic defense of causal decision theory. We could read about causal decision theory. The hereby commit account of inference. So we can talk about inference. Let's see. This is 15 pages, 13 pages. Let's see if that one's available. If you're not available, I can't read your paper. I can't read my paper because it's not available. An account of inference. I don't know if, well, this would be interesting to me. I don't know if it would be interesting to you folks. Like, you guys want to be like navel gazing about like what it does it mean to infer things. Okay, so what do we got? The possibility of emergent conscious causal powers. That sounds like fun. Ooh, and it's downloadable. Oh, it's a docx. I don't have this set up for docx, but let's see what I can do with it. Huh. Let's see. How long is this actually? It's 12 pages and double spaced. Oh my god, I want to read this now. Okay, so let's try. Try. I should not be doing this. This is gonna break my setup. My apologies. But I'm trying to do something in real time, which is something you should never do. Okay, I think that worked. Okay, so this is the possibility of emergent conscious causal powers. So how would we actually? And there's the this is the link is now in chat. So we're gonna try to. Oh, what did I just do? Where did my window go? Boom. There we go. We're gonna try and do this real quick. Okay. Let's see. Here we are. Okay, so this is the possibility of emergent conscious causal powers by Lok Chi Chan and Andrew James Latham. And I apologize for how I'm saying your names. This is forthcoming in the Australasian Journal of Philosophy, a top journal of philosophy as I understand it. Okay, and so as always, feel free to ask questions. Yes, my first time reading it too, so here goes nothing. Introduction. Lutas recently articulated an argument for the impossibility of emergent conscious causal powers. For him, there are two possible accounts of such powers. Either emergent consciousness brings about its effect actively, or it brings it about passively. Lutus presents his argument as a dilemma, with each account being problematic for different reasons. So, I don't know what a conscious causal power would be, but I would assume that would be like the ability to make a conscious decision, because then you are causally changing your own future actions. So this is the question: how do we arrive at being able to make decisions that affect our own future actions? There are many accounts of emergence in... Hey, Viewbot! What's up? Yep, what's up? So we're reading... just started, so here we go. There are many accounts of emergence in the literature. Weak versions of emergence are compatible with the standard formulations of physical realization, according to which the realized property is not distinct from its realizer properties, but is the result of their joint contributions. Lutus, though, is concerned with a strong version of emergence, according to which the emergent phenomena and physical bases are wholly distinct. He describes the emergent phenomena as a sui generis mental force, something akin to telekinesis. We agree with Lutus that there are no strongly emergent conscious causal powers, but disagree they are impossible. The emergentist can escape Lutus' challenge by rejecting his metaphysical assumptions. Okay, so here's the thing. It's like, when you make a decision, is that fully separate from what's going on in your brain? Like, do we have like the mind and brain that are completely separate, and like via the pineal gland of Descartes, it's kind of somehow affecting the brain, but it's nothing to do with the underlying stuff because it's a different thing. It's just your mind is over here. You've got the mind, and it's dualism because you've got one thing here, and then you've got the brain, which is then affected by the decision in the mind. Or the weak version was, if you take the sum total of what your brain is doing, then that counts as the emergent thing, because the sum total is in some sense unique. So it's a unique thing. That sum total at that time is what is affecting you. It's not just any one little thing, it's the sum total, and that somehow is that's not wholly distinct. That's the weak version, but it's it's not distinct from its realizer right here. Not distinct from the underlying properties. So that's kind of what the weak version is. But it's still unique because it's like the sum total of it. There, as a result of their joint contributions. Sorry, you can't really see. The joint contributions across the page. Okay. So, following Lutus' treatment of active and passive causation, our discussion of the two kinds of causation is independent from one another. Our discussion of active causation focuses on Lutus' characterizations of science, the hard problem of consciousness, and the metaphysics of properties. Meanwhile, our discussion of passive causation focuses on Lutus' analysis of the metaphysics of causation. Okay, so now we know what's going on. We're going to try to make sense of how we make decisions that affect our future actions, basically. Active causation. According to the active account, phenomenal consciousness brings about an effect through its own causal efficacy. In developing its counterargument, Lutus assumes that the physical should be defined by the posits of physical science, and that science can only ever gather data about manifested dispositions and not intrinsic categorical properties. Hence, everything physical is dispositional in nature. Okay, so basically, it's descriptive. It's not telling you anything intrinsic about what the brain is doing. It's describing the physical characteristics of the brain, is basically what Lutus is saying. And that seems like what these people might be focusing on. Lutus' argument is as follows. The emergentist must make a further assumption about the nature of phenomenal consciousness. The emergentist can treat consciousness as non-physical only if he grants it a non-causal nature. If this nature is not granted, then it follows that the physical properties can play the role of consciousness. So physicalism is a better theory because it is simpler and more unified. If phenomenal consciousness is a categorical property and possesses causal powers, then it has both categorical and a causal component. But since nothing essentially non-causal can equal anything essentially causal, the emergentist must recognize them as two separate entities with disparate natures somehow wrapped together. Okay, so basically it says, look, you have to, if you're going to say it emerges out of the brain somehow and it's separate, then there's two things going on. You've got your mind and your brain. So this is just a good old Cartesian dualism. And you've got two separate entities and somehow wrapped together. That's basically it. We're just in Descartes world. It is unclear why the emergentist should accept this argument. Emergentism is the view that there are some high-level novel properties which are irreducible to and unpredictable in terms of the fundamental properties. There might be high-level causal properties of this kind, and even if physicalist explanations of these properties are possible, this does not automatically mean they're the best ones. Simplicity and unification are not only considerations when choosing theories, especially when different camps have different views on what considerations, theoretical virtues, explananda, and the like there are, and which are most important. Lutis, though, highlights an important point. A common response to emergentism is that failures of reductive accounts might be due to incomplete scientific knowledge, and emergentists cannot rule this out. However, emergentist accounts of consciousness place consciousness into an ontological category wholly distinct from that of physical properties, making it exempt from physical explanations. But even if emergentists adopt this strategy, it is unclear why she can only choose the non-causal category. Emergentists and other non-physicalists have appealed to numerous other ontological categories in the past. For instance, being intentional was Kripke and Bieler, being first person or subjective, Nagel, being self-aware, that goes also back to Bieler, being the basis of an agent causation, that's O'Connor, and being irreducibly macroscopic, and these folks. Importantly, none of these ontological categories is obviously in conflict with being causal, nor excludes the possibility of possessing active powers. One related worry is that the non-causal category might not be wholly distinct from the physical. Lutis here follows metaphysicians who defend categorical humility, the view that physical science can never know of the non-causal, intrinsic categorical basis of things. We take no stand here on categorical humility, except to say that it is not obviously true when considered alongside scientific theories. Okay, so basically, we just don't know what's going on with causality sometimes. And it's like, why are we saying that the brain has to be a certain way or the mind has to be a certain way? So, there is the possibility that physical science can posit non-causal properties. For instance, physics posits what they call intrinsic properties like mass. Mass is not a force, it is a property that correlates with inertial and gravitational forces by playing the roles of inertial mass, active gravitational mass, and passive gravitational mass. While humility theorists believe that mass is a causal dispositional property, others have suggested that it might be an intrinsic categorical property. For these philosophers, we discover, define, and measure an object's mass, a quantitative nature intrinsic to that object, via observing the object's dispositions, but it is just revealed by, and it is not identical with, the relevant dispositions. Okay, so I know that's like a mouthful, but there's two ways of viewing things. Are you a realist about like mass, or are you just talking about the properties that we can read off of our experiments? So we can read off the resistance to like acceleration, which is inertia. And so what is the mass? Is it an actual thing, or is it just the resistance to shaking, the inertial property? And that's the disposition. It's to be disposed to resisting acceleration. So it's a hard question, actually. And so it's like, how real do you think these things are? Like, how real is mass? And so that's the question. How real do you think the your abilities to think and control your own life are? Can we only see our ability to like what are the effects of our decisions, or is there actually something there that is making the causal that's making us make the decisions? So are we reading off the property that we made a decision, or are we actually seeing that we made a decision? That's what they're asking here. Of course, humility theorists believe that scientific inquiry is restricted to the causal, though there is no agreement why this is the case. We will set aside arguments for humility and instead demonstrate our point by diagnosing the problem with Luta's argument. Lutus first appeals to a widely accepted view that all data must causally affect scientists' senses, either directly or indirectly through prior effects on instruments. He then argues that since categorical properties cannot causally affect us, they cannot be known to us. Other formulations of this argument are in Russell and Langton. Yeah, this goes back to, I think, Russellian monism, which I was reading about for some other reasons recently. This argument is problematic because it reflects a narrow, a priori conception of science according to which the explanatory relevance of something can only be grounded in its causal connections to the explanandum. This view has been rejected by some scientists, for example Carroll, for not all scientific explanations are causal explanations. There are, for instance, synchronic explanations in which we explain a phenomenon by positing the entities that ground it. While it is natural to think that the positive entity must bear some ontological relation to the explanandum, the relation need not be a causal one. Instead, it could be one of, amongst others, realization, determination, necessitation, supervenience, composition, or structural support, none of which must be causal. Physicist Sean Carroll uses the multiverse theory, which posits many universes that are causally disconnected from us, as an example to demonstrate this point. This means that we must loosen the a priori causal restriction on science which Lutus assumes. However, when we do this, we can no longer rule out categorical properties from being explanatory. We might even be able to grasp them just like other entities uncovered by science. Okay, so I think what's going on here is it says, look, the scientist's toolbox is much richer than only causal explanations. They can use all these other things. Like, you can come up with like a multiverse theory, which may be very hard to test because it's just not got they're causally disconnected from us. But that doesn't mean it isn't part of real science. And the philosophers should not be telling the scientists what counts as real science when the scientists are doing very good real science on their own. They don't need our help to do good science, especially when they're doing it and everyone knows they're doing it. And then the philosophers coming like, no, you shouldn't be talking about multiverses. It's like, who the hell are you, philosophers, to tell the physicists when they're doing good physics? So it's like, that's just sort of, science is richer than the narrow version of like cause and effect. It's like the old Humean version of the world. You've got like billiard balls knocking around. You can just talk about that. Well, that's great, but it's also a very, very simplistic, simplified view of the universe and how science gets done. Okay, what does this have to do with Lutus' discussion of emergence? There are two implications. The first concerns the nature of consciousness and why the hard problem of consciousness seems persistent. As previously noted, Lutus argues that, for the emergentist, consciousness should be understood as non-physical because it is a kind of categorical property, whereas physical properties should be understood as causal properties. But we now see that some physical properties, like mass, could plausibly be categorical properties. So Lutus' argument, which appeals to the distinction between categorical and causal properties, is contentious. Of course, no one thinks the hard problem of consciousness can be solved by appealing to something like categorical mass properties. But this intuition merely shows that the reason why the hard problem is hard is, perhaps, not due to consciousness being a non-causal categorical property, but rather due to something else. After all, we have intuitions regarding the uniqueness of consciousness, but these intuitions do not reveal precisely why consciousness is unique. This supports our earlier speculation that some other unique nature of consciousness, for example being irreducibly macroscopic, might be crucial to why the problem is hard. While these options remain open, Lutus' argument does not generalize to them. Well, look, what would irreducibly macroscopic actually mean? Like, how does macroscopicness have anything to do with consciousness? That seems like it's a little harder. They're saying, hey, look, maybe there's some other weird thing going on with consciousness, and that's why it seems so different from the physical. but they didn't really establish that. They're just saying, look, there might be some categorical thing going on here, and I thought what they were going to say is maybe we've got ourselves into a semantic problem. We don't quite understand what we're talking about when we are making a distinct. Hey Shane, what's up? Parsing the grammar here is causing something weird with my consciousness. Welcome to philosophy. That is everything. That is a lot of what goes on in philosophy. Is just trying to figure out what the heck they're saying. And what they're saying here is, look, I thought what they were going to say was that there's a semantic problem, that maybe we haven't got the semantics between causal and non-causal things worked out really well. What they're saying is no, that there might be some other very strange thing that you can't separate up the causal and the non-causal, not because of we don't understand the distinction, but because there's overlap between these two things. And it's like, well, what kind of overlap is there between the causal and the non-causal? I don't know. And they don't know either, but they're just going to say it remains open. And so you have to, like, sort of, at this point, I have to judge, like, how open do I actually think this really is? I don't know. What is the overlap between the causal and the non-causal? And, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know Shane McGinnis, everyone should know Shane McGinnis. Let's see if my shout-outs work. Oh my god, the shout out worked. Woo! Okay, that's awesome. And what I definitely did not do is I gotta try that again. And look at that on the screen. Look at that on the screen. I got a shout out alert thingy with the picture. Isn't that fun? That's brand new, Shane. I did that wasn't working last week. It should have been working, but I got it working for this week. So yeah, I can shout people out with an image. Shane is a historian and a sociologist, and just did a history of Ukraine up until like a few days ago. So if you want to know what is going on in the world right now, and you want some history and like a good explanation that like accessible and interesting, should go check out Shane. So Shane has pot. Yeah, and that was a lot of pot you had right there. Like, let's go look at the picture again. Yeah, Shane does have pot. It's a lot of pot. So, okay. So let's see. All right. So we were not sure how this whole. Yeah, you might not want to. You have to be careful with that pot. It's old. Oh yeah. So Shane, what I'm doing is I'm just reading this philosophy paper. Feel free to ask questions. I hope I don't break your thinking. It's not the goal here. Trying to explain philosophy doesn't always go well. All right. So already been fired. Yeah. So you got some burnt pot. Secondly, Lewis argues that categorical and causal properties are non-identical, and so are separate entities with disparate natures. This is also contentious. As Oderberg remarks, two properties can be inseparable due to their natures, but this inseparability does not imply identity. Shane is asked, to be honest, I'm not quite certain what causal and non-causal means. Okay, so in philosophy, I'm not going to go into all of causality, but we can just go into causal and non-causal explanations. So being American, you can appreciate that if you hit a baseball through a window, you can ask, why did the window break? And the causal explanation is, well, the ball hit it and destroyed it. That's why I did it. And that would be a causal explanation, because it's like, what caused the breakage of the window in terms of sort of a temporal, it wasn't broken then, it is broken now. But you could also explain why did the window break by saying, well, it is a brittle material. So a non-causal explanation of why the window broke is because it is brittle. That is not telling you the causal chain of events that caused it to break. That is explaining why it broke due to its disposition, which is what they're talking about here, to be breakable. So it's the old joke, why did it make you go to sleep? Because it had a soporific property. And that tells you very little, but in the case of a window, that might tell you something, that like glass is a brittle material, and then you did learn something. So you might get more information off that explanation. You can learn something. So the causal here is, in some sense, the causal chain of events that led up to a certain event happening, and the non-causal is the dispositions that allowed for that chain of events to occur, that it were necessary conditions for that. So, what these authors are doing are trying to blur these lines right here, because the apparently who they're arguing against, this Lutus person, is trying to say, look, your consciousness is causal separately from the physical reality of your brain. And so they're saying it's non-causal, like the physics in your brain is causal. And so what they're doing here is they're trying to say, hold up, this can be blurred, and then we're not so sure what exactly the mind and brain, what the distinction is here. Because if the brain is just the physics of the biochemistry, that's one thing. But if there's something else going on, the consciousness, then how do we explain that? So, okay. So secondly, Lutus argues that the categorical and causal properties are not identical, and so are separate entities with disparate natures. So this is the dualism right here. Disparate natures, and there's two of them. This argument is also contentious. As Oderberg remarks, two properties can be inseparable due to their natures, but this inseparability does not imply identity. For instance, the radius of a circle is inseparably related to its circumference while not being identical to it. Of course, the relation between categorical and dispositional properties is more sophisticated than this. However, Oderberg's point suffices to show that there can be necessary connections between non-identical properties. Consider again Smart's view on the relation between mass and gravitation, a possible example of Oderberg's point in the metaphysics of science. Mass and gravitation are inseparably related due to their natures or some law of nature, but nevertheless are non-identical. Similarly, for the emergentist, pain and pain-related psychology and behavior, for example, might be inseparably related due to their natures or some law of nature. Okay, so basically it's saying, look, there's different physical properties, but a lot of times they might have a common cause, and because they have a common cause here, well, not necessarily cause, there might be some underlying dependency, I should say. Like between inertia, gravity, and mass, there's some dependency between these things. Then it's not so clear that if one's a causal thing and one's a non-causal thing, but there's an underlying dependency, then there might be some necessary connections there, and you can't separate them so clearly. So, okay, to conclude, Lutus' argument against active causation relies on a particular characterization of science, the hard problem of consciousness, and the metaphysics of properties. We have argued that the categorical humility as part of science is contentious, since there plausibly are categorical properties posited by non-causal explanations. Two implications are as follows. First, framing the hard problem in terms of phenomenal consciousness as non-causal categorical properties, given that categorical and causal physical properties might be inseparably connected, phenomenal consciousness too might be connected with its powers in this way. Okay, so that was all to say what I was just saying earlier. I know it was a bit of a mouthful, very big words here, but basically it's saying, look, the consciousness that you have might be inseparably connected to the biochemistry in your brain, the physical properties. And so that's kind of interesting. And then they're saying, look, well, then they're not separate. They're still dependent on each other in some way, or they have the dependency going back to something else that's really controlling both of them. That's also an odd thing, because it's sort of positing something in between the consciousness that you have and the biochemistry in the brain. Is this just a new pineal gland? Are they really going all the way back to Descartes and being like there's a third thing there that connects up the mind and the brain? I'm not exactly sure, but that really seems like what it is. Because, let's see, let me see if I can find like a sense here. I can do it. Shane asks, would that imply that our consciousness as humans is unique to humanity because of our specific brains? Might be. It might be that because the question is, what our specific consciousness might be unique to us because of how it relates to our specific brain chemistry. That's fair. And they're saying there might be some overlap in this stuff, and then our specific consciousness would be even more dependent on our brain chemistry because it is related to that. And I don't even think that is a very radical thought, that our specific consciousness, like say you have a dog, your dog might be conscious, but it's going to be different from ours, and it has to do with the brain chemistry. And so it's like, all right, that's not too far out there. Now, the question might be, to push that farther, is our consciousness somehow completely inaccessible to other things because they could not think it, because it depends necessarily on this kind of brains we have? That would be interesting too, but I don't think they're going that far. Yeah, see, I wonder how these people would address things like psilocybin. I don't know how they think about drugs. That's a little pushing it. Viewbot Prime asks, aren't they just proving Luta's point? Strong emergence seems impossible if categorical and causal properties are two sides of the same coin. Well, they're saying it's not two sides of the same. Well, Lutas really wants them to be separate, it looks like, because not so much two sides of the same coin. Lutas wants there to be strong dualism, that there is two different things. They're trying to say two sides of the same coin. So, it seems impossible. Let me see. Am I getting this mixed up? Strong emergence seems impossible if categorical and causal properties are two sides of the same coin. Let's see. I'm on page 6. What did they say they were doing up here at the beginning? See, we agree with Lutus there are no strongly emergent conscious causal powers, but disagree they are impossible. So up here they were saying, look, we agree that this doesn't, you're right in some sense, they're proving the point, but they're trying to show that they're impossible, that they disagree that they are impossible. Because they're trying to show, look, you can actually have these things. If you have this sort of weird overlap, then you can actually talk about them as causal, categorical properties. So that's the thing. They're trying to show that there's still space. We don't know what this space is, and it's kind of, because they were talking about joined by some nature, and they were referring to maybe the old style nature of like humors and stuff back in the day, that there's some other thing going on there, and they were just saying that in the part I was reading, or some law of nature, or a law, which again would be some sort of third thing out in the world that was doing the work. Shane says, mostly it is an alteration of brain chemistry via something like hallucinogen and alteration of consciousness, but I might also be thinking out of my ass. No, it's a good question. What exactly does the change in brain chemistry due to our consciousness? Because clearly it does something. And I don't want to like shortchange people in the past. They clearly knew that. Like, they really knew about drugs. They understood very clearly about that sort of thing. So that was part of their thought. But I think the part a lot of times that I think Descartes might have been doing was he was thinking in some sense the rationality was like the real mind, and then like the other stuff kind of got messed up along the way. So it's like, yeah, you have your mind, and then like maybe the physical is how it got interpreted, and so that sort of corrupted it. I don't remember what like the Greeks thought, because they clearly got drunk all the time, and I can't think of what Aristotle or Plato or whatever said about alcohol. I mean, Dionysus, like they were famous for their drinking parties. But yeah, so I don't know if like that sort of example would have a would matter here, because no one's denying that they're related. They're sort of denying exactly how far apart they are. And the strong emergentists, they're agreeing that they don't think it's strong, where there's a completely separate mind and a completely separate brain. like a hardcore dualism. These authors are just saying that's possible still. Okay. Where was I? Yeah, so it's connected with powers in this way. So this is actually a powers argument. What can things be doing? So, yeah. So this is the thing. They're arguing for like some sort of common cause between the brain and the mind, like the physical brain and then the mental powers. So it's connected with its powers. So this is when you're starting to get into metaphysics right here. So when consciousness is connected with its powers, and then we've got a powers argument showing that the mind is doing something separate from what the physical brain, is doing. Okay, so these two solutions characterize phenomenal consciousness differently, but either way will diffuse Luta's argument. Both solutions also share the distinct benefit for emergentists of making phenomenal consciousness scientifically accessible. Phenomenal consciousness is either not a categorical property or a categorical property available to non-causal scientific explanations. Hence, the strong emergentist project could be naturalistic and empirically tractable. So yeah, that's all they're saying. This is the whole argument to get this one little could right here. All right? That's the whole thing, is that they're trying to say, look, because there's overlap in how we talk about science, you could still talk about mind in a physical way or a naturalistic way. Okay. So feel free to keep, I'm going to continue, but just ask more questions if you want. Like, I'll stop and go back. It's easy enough. Passive causation. Let us move to Luta's argument against the passive account of emergent conscious causal powers. On this account, phenomenal consciousness by its own nature has no causal powers. Instead, physical entities actively respond to it. Alright, so anything there? No, it's fine. In his argument, Lutus assumes that emergence is a kind of a causation because it involves a genuine change through time, the coming into being of the emergent out of nowhere and from nothing. We find this assumption unusual, for it seems to conflate together two different kinds of causation: diachronic causation, which occurs between states of affairs at different times, and metaphysical causation, which runs along the axis of fundamentality from most fundamental to least fundamental at a time. Some philosophers will reject there is such a thing as metaphysical causation because they do not think that entities across levels are wholly distinct. But recall that the kind of emergentism discussed by Lutus takes the emergent and its physical bases to be wholly distinct, so Lutus might be right. Some metaphysical relation, such as causation, might be required to connect these wholly distinct entities. Of course, it is up for grabs what the relation might be. Even if one disagrees with Lutus that the right relation is causation, one might instead consider the recent literature on metaphysical grounding, which is a generative interlevel metaphysical relation. Some authors in that literature take both diachronic causation and interlevel metaphysical relations to be generative relations of the same kind. All that matters for our purposes here is to note that one may consider Lutus' argument as being concerned with generative relations as opposed to anything specific about causation. Alright, I don't think y'all have to worry anything about that. This is just sort of talking about the background of contemporary philosophy. Yeah, it's just where this paragraph was just sort of placing it in contemporary work. So here then is Lutus' argument. He begins by characterizing three theories of causation. The Humean account: causation is merely arrangement of entities. Governing law account: some laws of nature which are irreducible, non-concrete entities govern the causal behavior of concrete entities. The power account: entities themselves have powers essentially and thereby necessitate how they themselves causally behave. For Lutus, emergence is incompatible with the power account because the latter implies reductionism. Specifically, emergentists must deny more than merely correlational connections between base and emergent, or else the emergent would be nothing over and above its bases. But under the power account, the cause itself has the power to bring about the effect, and this entails the aforementioned more than merely correlational relation. Yeah, so the power account, they're saying, look, basically, it's just the entities themselves, like the brain, basically has the power to do this stuff. And so the physical chemistry does it. There is nothing else to it. That's just saying it's the power of the biochemistry of our brain is what necessitates consciousness, but there's nothing over and above that. So that's all it is. So the emergentist who says there is something over and above just the biochemistry must deny that there is something that's just that the brain chemistry itself has the power to do it. Okay. However, the existence of passive causation also entails the power account, for only when some entities have power in their nature can there be active causal powers and not mere correlations. Otherwise, it would rule out even the possibility of distinguishing passive from active cases of active causes, and therewith even the possibility of recognizing passive causation as a distinct kind. But both the Humean account and the governing law account involve no active powers. The former account involves only mere regularities, and under the latter account, entities are connected by laws of nature that are extrinsic to them. In sum, because the passive causation both requires and is incompatible with the power account, it is conceptually impossible. Okay, so Hume is just talking about arrangements of things, just regular arrangements. Governing law says there's a law that governs the stuff, and then the power account says the entities themselves. But the problem is, if you have strong emergence, it doesn't sound like it works, because then you are emerging out of only the power of the brain. But then if you're talking about passive causation, that it's only somehow a correlation with that, then how do you distinguish something that is a passive causal power? I think. Okay, so we think this argument is unsound. It assumes that metaphysical causation and the diachronic causation can both be accounted for by the same theory of causation. But if there are really two kinds of causation, why assume that they share the same nature? While different accounts of causation are incompatible when they are about the same causal processes, that incompatibility is no longer obvious if they are about different kinds of causal processes. Perhaps diachronic causation fits the description of the power account, whereas metaphysical causation fits the description of the Humean account or the governing law account. If this is right, the emergentist can offer Lutus everything he asked for, both merely correlational connections between base and emergent, and active and passive causal powers. Specifically, the emergent is merely correlated with its physical basis, but the physical nevertheless possesses power and actively responds to the emergent. Okay, so we have two different kinds of causal things here, and they pick out different sort of ways to work with different theories of causation. So, okay, maybe. I mean, maybe. That's part of the thing. It's like, I don't know. Everything here has gotten very possibly this could happen. So, like, if this is right and stuff like that. So, all right, perhaps. One benefit for the emergentist for being a pluralist about causation is that it makes sense of the difference we observe between diachronic and synchronic cases. For instance, diachronic cases typically involve matters like energy transference, whereas no such matters are involved in synchronic cases. Of course, many metaphysicians think that only one account of causation holds true. I was going to say, this is going to be running into trouble, because most people think there's one causation and one causation alone. It's like there's causal things and non-causal things, basically. And so having plural causation is going to be worrisome for a lot of people. This is understandable because the relevant accounts are typically conceived of as rivals, and many emphasize the importance of simplicity and unity when doing metaphysics. You agree with that? Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that's mainly how people think about stuff. What these people are trying to do is they're trying to like shake it up. So you're saying, well, maybe there's a possibility to do it another way. I don't know if that's a good idea, but that's kind of like this is their strategy for the paper. So they like the simplicity and unity when doing metaphysics. And that's really why people do metaphysics, is for those reasons. But if there are, contra those metaphysicians' assumptions, two kinds of causation instead of one, then it seems natural that we might need a different account for each of them. Further, this view is not lacking in unity, as there is only one only one account for each kind of causation. Finally, we so far have followed Luther's assumption that metaphysical causation, like diachronic causation, really counts as causation. However, the points remain the same if we consider both relations as being generative relations. There might be different generative relations with different metaphysical natures. Okay, let me just point something out. Tropical Geek says, unless multiple causations are parallel to likelihoods. I don't think that's what they're saying here. They're saying there's two separate sort of causal paths that one can take, and it looks like I don't think they're talking about likelihoods. They're talking about causal paths, and so I think it's a little different. But what I want to point out here is that they seem to be just doing a dualism of causation to trying to save whatever their theory is, as opposed to like the dualism of mind. And so it's just looking structurally like instead of having the dualism of like mind and brain, they're having dualism of causation over here, and that's like that's going to replace the other dualism. Just structurally in terms of the argumentation, if you're just punting the dualism, you're not really doing anything. Maybe it's better, maybe it is, I don't know. But just structurally looking at what they're doing, they've just added a second causality. And why would you want to have a second causality? Well, because then they're trying to have a unified theory of mind. Well, if you have a unified theory of mind and you're trying to get away from dualism, you don't want to bring the dualism back. It's a revenge. You're just getting revenge of the dualism in this sort of argument. It just happens to show up under causality now. But have you got away from the problem? I worry they haven't, because basically if you're just moving the dualism, then you haven't actually solved anything. But I don't know. Oh, this is the end. I'm sorry. Let's just finish up the last paragraph. Throughout our discussion, we've suggested several alternatives to Luther's assumptions that do not rule out emergent conscious powers. The emergentist may appeal to them to hold on to emergentism. One might ask why we reject emergent conscious powers if we find them possible. The reason is that there is, from our perspective, no empirical ground for supposing they actually exist. But we doubt that they can be rendered impossible from the armchair. We hope, too, that our discussion of emergence can supplement some account of emergence outside of consciousness studies, such as those in quantum mechanics, though this is work for another discussion. Okay, so now we get their giant conclusion. They don't actually think that they're going to get a strong possibility. We doubt that this can be done from an armchair, but they want to say that there is no consciousness, there is no evidence for consciousness, and so everything that we think we're explaining with talking about consciousness as a thing unique to itself can be, if you shake up the underlying metaphysics, it might be able to, and you could possibly be able to explain it with the physical reality if you have some sort of expanded view of science. That's what they want to say, because they are naturalists, basically is what it is. They think from their perspective, they're talking about empirical grounds, and that's what they want to say about consciousness. They want to explain it away. And so now we understand them better. And how do you do this? You show that all the arguments for consciousness being very separate from the physical biology, the biochemistry, can be sort of shaken up. Now, I don't know if you guys have questions about this. Like, feel free to ask. But here's what I want to say about this. There was an awful lot of hypotheticals at one point. Well, let me see if I can go find them. See, this is the first time I highlighted the could. So this is what it could possibly be. Where was that time when they were listing off all the different ways? You're not completely sure where to start? Well, let me point out where I would start. There was a point at which there was a list of, I don't remember exactly where it was. Let's see if I can find it quick. Yeah. But they were talking about all the different ways that we might think of stuff. Yeah, here it is. Emergentists and other non-physicalists have appealed to numerous other ontological categories in the past. For instance, being intentional, being first person or subjective, being the basis for being self-aware, being the basis for agent causation, being irreducibly macroscopic. So we've got 5 different ways people have thought about stuff. What they did not do is show that any one of these ways could actually work. And they were talking about a whole different stuff, like when they said it was like irreducibly macroscopic. Does anyone think that consciousness has anything to do with being irreducibly macroscopic? I don't. Like, that's not normally what comes to mind. Being big enough to see. Is being big enough to see actually have anything to do with mind? I don't see why it would. Why would it have to be necessarily macroscopic? But like, this is the question. Yeah, like this being irreducibly macroscopic, and maybe this is a really good theory. But like, my first reaction to this is that I don't understand what being irreducibly macroscopic has to do with consciousness. And so what they didn't do is they didn't actually show that any one of these things did work. They just said it could possibly work. People have said this in the past. And I find that the fact that people have said stuff in the past doesn't make these good theories. Now, some of these people are big names. Like Kripke's a very big name. Nagel's a very big name. I don't know these other folks. They may be excellent for all I know. But that's the thing. If you're going to say that there's a way to reduce consciousness to the biochemistry, and then you're saying, well, and the way you're going to do it is that our understanding of the physical reality, we're using the wrong ontological categories, and there's a whole bunch of them. These may all be great theories, but will they actually do the work that these people want? And there's only 5 of them here, and they didn't show any of the 5 actually worked. Are they using... See, Shane, that's an excellent question. I have no damned clue how they're actually using it. And this is my beef with them right here. And I don't even think this is a bad paper. I think I like this paper. I like what they're doing. But we don't know what any of these things mean. Now, we could go read all of these references that are in this section. We could go read them all. But it would be doing the work that I'd want them to do to show me that any of these theories have any chance of making a dent in the problem, instead of just listing off theories that might make a dent in the problem. I don't exactly know what they mean by collective. I don't know what they mean by macroscopic as collective consciousness or an individual one, or is the brain macroscopic, like the physical like lump in your brain that is a lump and is a macroscopic one, and that has something to do with consciousness needs to have a large size of mass to deal with. Like, that might be what they're arguing, and that might even be the case. There might be a minimum amount of complexity required in the physical reality to generate the sort of state of human thought. Like, it might just not be possible to be done at a very small size because the complexity is not possible to generate at that size. I don't know. But they didn't argue any of that. They just sort of hand-waved over here. And this is the interesting thing. Tropical Geek says, from the neurophysiology that I know, I can only understand that the micro level of the brain is not able to explain the mind. Okay, so this is also something I was working on recently. It's called the combination problem. It's that if you get down to the bottom level, you definitely are not, like, if you're looking at like individual things, as Tropical Geek says, the micro level, it definitely can't explain everything that's going on in the macroscopic whole brain. Now, maybe there could possibly be a very small thing that is doing something there, but it seems unbelievably unlikely. And so that's current neurophysiology, as Tropical Geek has brought up. This is the current state of knowledge, is that this cannot happen. Now, maybe that's what this means by being irreducibly macroscopic, that we need the whole brain and it's not reduced to the micro level of the brain. Again, this was not stated in this article, and maybe that's what Van Cleave and James were saying. You know what? This is James 1890. This is the no. You know what's funny is this is William James, the very famous pragmatist. I think this reference is the combination problem, that you can't reduce the brain, like the conscious experience we have to little consciousness. How do you combine smaller ideas or anything from some small piece in any little piece of the brain that might be doing its own thought into like a huge human thought, like to one big human thought? So you're saying something like the way that neurons fire off doesn't explain how we possess consciousness? Exactly, Shane. There is no one way to add up, to combine. This is called the combination problem, and it goes back to William James in 1890, that there is no way that even if a neuron had some sort of like proto-thought in it, there's no way to combine all these proto-thoughts into being an actual human thought. Or at least there's no known way. People argue about this constantly right now. Tropical Geek says, thought has to have physiological substrates, but it is not possible to observe it by looking at physiology per se in the neurotransmitters, etc. Exactly. That is 100% the current state of knowledge right now. We don't think that you can look at a neurotransmitter and then identify any one thought. You might be able to figure out like some areas where some neurotransmitters affect certain kinds of thoughts, but you can't add up. You can't figure out how to combine a few neurons and get yourself an actual thought. Tropical Geek can show you neurons firing. I can show you when they fire. I can show you what things are involved in the firing, but that does not sum into thought. Yeah, the sum is the problem. When you try to sum up the pieces of the brain into like the whole thought, we have no idea how that works. Shane says this would be like looking at a transistor and implying the internet. More than that. The concept of the transistor is kind of similar to the concept of the whole network of the internet, but the internet itself, in the idea that the internet has ideas in it, that is a separate entire thing than anything that would even be implied by like the existence of a transmitter or even the electricity going across a transmitter. Yeah, so that's kind of what the argument is here. So, okay, so now that we have an idea, because I actually know this reference, is that why we think that consciousness, what was I saying? So that's why there could be overlap or the emergence could break down. I don't know. Actually, I kind of doubt that. James was arguing against yeah, see, this is the thing. People have been arguing about this for over 130 years. And this is going back panpsychism, which is an ancient theory, like thousands of years, like saying that everything has consciousness, like everything, like animals, plants, dogs, rocks, the sky, whatever. So, well, thank you, Shane. I hope this was like a good article. But it's like, this is the question. So, if you're going to overlap this sort of thing between the physical and the mental, and this is what's going on in panpsychism, and that's what this James article is referencing. Yeah, how do you do that? And panpsychism is a way out of the dualism problem in mind. It is. But, again, these authors did not actually specify that. They're just saying that this is how it works. That these are possibilities. And they could have just come out and said panpsychism, because that's what's going on here. So, at least that's what's going on in this reference. So, this is my problem with this paper, is that they just had a lot of coulds and didn't have a lot of, like, is. Like, that's just what it was. They were trying to show their space here, but they didn't really come down on any one side. If you're going to, try to make a point, make a strong argument, you try to have, like, thesis, they're just trying to open up the possibility when, frankly, there are other theories out there. But yeah. All right, any further questions? Because I've been going for an hour and a half, and I haven't been streaming very much, and my throat hurts, actually. I'm weak. I have to, like, work up to streaming again, because I don't talk that much. Unlike you, like, the teachers who stream, the idea that I speak this amount during the day, I do not speak this much during the day. I don't. I'm quiet. Yeah, well, I don't have the practice. Yeah, well, Shane, this is my only second stream in like a very long time. So I'm trying to stream on Wednesdays. Yeah, like what you do is extremely impressive, and like same with like Aris. He teaches for like 3 hours, and then he comes and streams for 3 hours. It's like he's talking for 6 hours. I talk for like an hour, and I'm like, so yeah. But like I just like running through some philosophy, try to, make it. I don't think I'm making it a whole lot more accessible. I'm trying to just sort of knock it down a few pegs. Like it can be read, it can be understood. You can, like, if you have some idea what's going on, you can sort of parse what's going on. I don't know the whole paper. I don't know everything that happened, all things. I probably screwed up some of the arguments. But even so, when you get down to it, I know some things. And when you get to the end, I know exactly what their point was. So, yeah. So, this is why I like doing this. I like showing that it can be done. I was Here's a fun story. So I was at the bar on Monday night, and I was going over a paper I needed to like improve upon. And so someone starts talking to me. There was this couple, might have been on a date, might have been married. They probably were married because they didn't look very happy. But uh, they're asking me why I would do this stuff. No, I was by myself at that point. I actually, so on Mondays I go to a philosophy workshop at the CUNY Grad Center, and then I had to do some work afterwards. So I went and got another drink and sat with my paper. And so these people started asking me, and the ladies asking me why I do this stuff. I'm like, I do it because I can. She's like, that's odd. She's like, there's no further reason. I'm like, I mean, maybe I'm a grumpy person and I just be like, this stuff is wrong and I'm trying to fix stuff or I'm trying to do something. But like, basically, I do things because I can. And it's like, it doesn't need to get done. But if I don't do it, no one's going to do this. So it's kind of, this is why I do stuff. Two epistemologists walk into the bar, but they don't know how. That's true. Epistemology is like rough. So, but yeah, so this is really only my second stream back. I've got like a whole more complicated streaming setup now. I'm quite happy with it when it works. When it doesn't work, well, what are you going to do? But yeah. So, you have any more questions? I thank everyone for being here. We've got Shane McGinnis, Tropical Geek. We've got Viewbot Prime. Thank you for coming by. Who else was here earlier? We got Mrs. Kite. Thank you. Calcor, Late Bloomer. Appreciate it. Question Mark Philosophy. Thank you for being here. Viewbot, yeah, no problem. Thank you. So that's about it. I'm gonna try to be back also on. Yay! Thank you, Tropical Geek. You got the Duck Rabbit. I appreciate it. So, did you subscribe? Wow, that's great. Thank you for the subscription. I didn't know you were subscribed. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm going to try to stream Wednesdays and possibly Sundays. I'm not sure about the weekend yet, but you redeemed. Okay, cool. Either way. Well, I mean, thank you for redeeming. It's a fun Duck Rabbit. Yeah, so I'm going to try to be back maybe Sundays and but definitely going to try for next Wednesday. Yeah, well, thanks for being here enough that you got enough points for the emote. I appreciate that too. So have a good night, everybody. Stay safe out there and be well.